to other law enforcement, to another law enforcement agency for a multi-million-dollar contract. 2 weeks later, the press office of the outgoing New Orleans mayor, Mitch Landrieu, told the Times-Picayune that his office would not renew its pro bono contract with Palantir. As Palantir's role in predictive policing began to grow into a national controversy, another shady intelligence company called Carbine 911, spelled Carbyne 911, or Carbine 911, also funded by Peter Thiel, began contracting with police departments and emergency service providers. Carbine 911, which received early investments from intelligence-linked figures such as Nicole Junkerman and the infamous Jeffrey Epstein, has stepped forward to take over what was once Palantir's predictive policing portfolio for counties throughout the country. As explored in this article, Carbine 911, has a predictive policing component that is eerily similar to Palantir's. In one recent example of Palantir Carbine Palantir Carbine baton passing, Carbine 911 entered into an agreement with the city of New Orleans this March, a deal that gave the company access to all emergency 911 call data and complete surveillance of those who call or interact with the city's emergency service system without any accountability or limitations. Just a month later, the New Orleans Police Department installed police checkpoints across the city. Yet Carbine 911's takeover of New Orleans in 2020 is not simply limited to 911 data collection. The company has also been involved in New Orleans' official COVID-19 response from the very beginning. In March, Carbine 911 also claimed to be helping to flatten the curve in New Orleans. I'm so sick of hearing that. Carbine's recent pivot into public health followed the tarnishing of the company's public image over the past year, which was initially spurred by the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. After it was revealed that Epstein had invested a sizable sum in the company and that 2 of his close associates, Nicole Junkerman and former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, were Carbine directors, the company became heavily scrutinized. The company became heavily scrutinized for its connections with Israeli intelligence. Carbine 911 has since removed most of its original board of directors from public view in an effort to distance itself from Epstein-connected characters such as Junkerman and Barak, and has also been using a company called Wowza to promote its services in an apparent effort to avoid further unwanted scrutiny. Wowza Media Systems, which was founded in 2005 by David Stubenval and Charlie Good, partnered with Carbine 911 in 2015 to build what Wowza referred to as a reliable, secure streaming ecosystem. In June of 2020, the CEO of Wowza admitted that New Orleans uses Carbine's COVID-19 service to manage emergency calls and help individuals who have contracted the virus contact telehealth professionals instead of flooding emergency rooms. Carbine has been fielding 70% of the city's emergency calls, a majority of which were related to COVID-19 symptoms. With the vast majority of Palantir's original predictive policing programs, while the vast majority of Palantir's original predictive policing programs have been discontinued over the past 2 years, its services are being replaced by Carbine 911. From New York to New Orleans, it seems that when one Thiel company relinquishes its control over public data, another Thiel-backed company emerges to take the reins. The mentality behind Palantir. Aside from the company's role in aiding the U.S. national security state to target minorities, it is also worth exploring the views on race espoused by Alex Karp, Palantir's CEO, and Peter Thiel, Palantir's co-founder, board member, and person most often associated with the company in the media. In late October, the New York Times published a lengthy profile of Palantir with a particular focus on its CEO, Alex Karp. In that article, Karp expressed his lifelong obsessive fear of being murdered due to his amorphous racial background, and that this fear propels a lot of decisions that are made by Palantir. Okay, nothing like building biases into a system. New York Times writer Michael Steinberger described Karp's fear. I still can't believe I haven't been shot or pushed out a window. That's a pathology, Karp told me. We were in Palantir's New York office, located in the meatpacking district. He wasn't being literal, despite the office's bulletproof windows and the bodyguards hovering nearby. Rather, he meant the feeling of an inevitable doom that has plagued him since childhood. He intuited from a young age that his background made him vulnerable. He said, "You're a racially amorphous far-left Jewish kid who's also dyslexic. Would you not come up with the idea that you're expletive?" I'm assuming he would mean a synonym of screwed. Although he was now the head of a major corporation, neither time nor success had diminished the anxiety. Of course. If the far right came to power, said the far leftist, he said he would certainly be among its victims. Who's the first person who's going to get hung? You make a list and I will show you who they get first. It's me. That's not a box I don't check. Little psycho. His fear, he said, propels a lot of decisions for this company. End quote. I bet it does. I will bet it does. A 2013 report published by Forbes noted that Karp has a 24/7 security detail that's explicitly there to protect him from extremists while he's busy being an extremist. It's certainly telling that Karp's long-standing and deep-seated fears of being targeted because of his ethnicity is a driving force behind many decisions that Palantir makes. So then you could actually use that to go after the people you think are going after you, whether it's justified or not. So he is the monster that he claims to fear, essentially. Yet, while Karp professed to the New York Times that his fear is linked to a potential rise of the, quote, far right, this claim becomes doubtful when examining the politics and views of Karp's close friend and Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel. A classmate of Thiel's at Stanford and now best-selling author Julie Lythcott-Haims wrote in 2016 that Thiel had told her back when they were at university together that, quote, apartheid was a sound economic system working efficiently and moral issues were irrelevant, end quote. Lythcott-Haims went on to say that Thiel's statements gave her the impression that he was indifferent to human suffering or felt that oppressing whole swaths of humans was a rational, justifiable element of a system of governance. Though this is just one anecdote, Thiel's own subsequent statements and actions support this portrayal of his views. For instance, as the New York Times recently noted, Thiel has argued that democracy and economic freedom are incompatible and suggested that giving women the vote had undermined the latter. In regard to the claim about democracy and economic freedom, An August article from Reason on Thiel's political views provides more insight. For instance, Thiel wrote in 2009 that, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible," end quote, while a major ally of Thiel's, blogger Curtis Yarvin, claimed that same year that democracy was a precancerous growth, always pregnant with some malignancy. Okay. Another influence on Thiel is German philosopher Carl Schmitt, a man infamous for his promotion of dictatorship as an inherently superior form of government. In a 2004 essay, Thiel used Schmitt's statement that, quote, "The high point of politics are the moments in which the enemy is, in concrete clarity, recognized as the enemy," end quote. In reference to the direction the West should take in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001. At the time, Thiel had lamented that a direct path forward to face down the post-9/11 enemy is prevented by America's constitutional machinery. It goes without saying that at the time of the September 11 attacks, the enemy was perceived largely along ethno-religious lines. Thiel has also been linked to white nationalists and the far-right fringe, the very groups that fuel Karp's deepest fears, while individuals closely connected to Thiel, such as Jeff Giesa, Giesea, are prominent supporters of alt-right personalities such as Mike Cernovich. Really? He's an alt-right personality? Mike Cernovich and Andrew Weave Auernheimer, Auernheimer. Auernheimer. Okay. Thiel's enduring close association with Palantir and his long-standing close relationship with Karp discredits Karp's claim that his fear of being murdered for his ethnicity is solely based on the fear of the far right, given that Thiel is essentially the far right personified. Regardless of Karp's real reasons for feeling so afraid, what is clear is that race is at the forefront of his thinking and thus at the forefront of much of Palantir's company decisions. Privatizing total information awareness. In order to fully understand the incredible power Palantir wields and why it was chosen to serve such an integral role in launching Operation Warp Speed, it's important to understand who is really behind the rise of Palantir and why. In general terms, Palantir was created to be the privatized panopticon of the national security state. Look up panopticon. Look up Palantir, look up panopticon. Look up Peter Thiel. The newest rebranding of the big data approach of intelligence agencies to quash dissent and instill obedience in the population. This has long been a key objective of U.S. intelligence, having been pioneered by the CIA as far back as the Vietnam War. It was covertly turned against the bulk of the U.S. population by both U.S. and Israeli intelligence during the Iran-Contra and Promise software scandals of the 1980s. Though efforts to use these big data approaches to target domestic protests and specific social movements had been ongoing for years. The panopticon was originally an English philosopher's concept for a new revolutionary prison design. But the idea was more fully developed by the French philosopher Michel Foucault. As independent journalist Johnny Vedmore reported in October, Foucault would use the concept of Bentham's original panopticon as a way to describe and explore disciplinary power. According to Foucault's work, disciplinary power has been successful due to its utilization of three technologies: hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examinations. Vedmore then notes, among the most notable of Foucault's analysis of the utility of the panopticon is the following quote from his book, Discipline and Punish. Quote, "The major effect of the panopticon is to induce in the inmate a state of consciousness and permanent visibility that assures the automatic functioning of power." In other words, the uncertainty of whether or not an individual is being constantly watched induces obedience in that individual, allowing only a few to control the many. It's perhaps unsurprising that for the recent profile on Palantir in the New York Times, Karp chose to pose with 3 Palantir employees under a large portrait of Foucault. During the Reagan administration, individuals at the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal began to develop a database called Main Core, which firmly placed the U.S. national security state on its current tech-fueled Foucauldian path from Foucault. A senior government official with a high-ranking security clearance and service in 5 presidential administrations told Radar in 2008 that Main Core was a database of Americans who, often for the slightest and most trivial reason, are considered unfriendly and who, in a time of panic, might be incarcerated. The database can identify and locate perceived enemies of the state almost instantaneously. It was expressly developed for use in continuity of government protocols by the key Iran-Contra figure Oliver North, and was used to compile a list of U.S. dissidents and potential troublemakers to deal with if the continuity of government protocol was ever invoked. Fascinating. That is fascinating. So basically, that just says that if continuity of government protocol was ever invoked, that this particular database, according to this, a database basically it's basically a hit list or a snatch and grab list of the perceived enemies of the state. Okay. Main Core utilized Promise software, which was stolen from its owners at Inslaw Incorporated by top Reagan and U.S. intelligence officials, as well as Israeli spy master Rafi Eitan, E-I-T-A-N. Also intimately involved in the Promise scandal was media baron and Israeli super spy Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. I can never figure out how to pronounce her damn name. The father of Ghislaine Maxwell, and reportedly the man who brought the intelligence-linked child trafficker and pedophile Jeffrey Epstein into the Israeli intelligence fold. The whole, what a tangled web we weave remark comes to mind. Like Promise, Main Core involved both U.S. and Israeli intelligence and was a big data approach to the surveillance of perceived domestic dissidents. Iran-Contra and Promise scandals were exposed, but they were subsequently covered up, largely by the then and current U.S. Attorney General William Barr. Really? Really? Main Core persisted and continued to amass data. That data could not be fully tapped into and utilized by the intelligence community until after the events of September 11, 2001, which offered a golden opportunity for the use of such tools against the domestic U.S. population, all under the guise of combating terrorism. For example, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, government officials reportedly saw Main Core being accessed by White House computers. September 11 was also used as an excuse to remove information firewalls within the national security state, expanding information sharing among agency databases and by extension also expanding the amount of data that could be assessed or accessed and analyzed by Main Core and its analogs. As Alan Wade, then serving as the CIA's chief information officer, pointed out soon after 9/11, one of the post-September 11 themes is collaboration and information sharing. We're looking at tools to facilitate communication in ways that we don't have today. You know, something I was just thinking was, Epstein died in 2019. October, I think, 2019. I believe Barr was the Attorney General. So if Barr had a relationship covered up the Iran-Contra and Promise scandals, and Epstein was somehow linked to all that, and Barr had already covered up one scandal. It makes me wonder what other scandals Barr has been involved in covering up. In an attempt to build on these two post-9/11 objectives simultaneously, the U.S. National Security State attempted to institute a public-private surveillance program so invasive that Congress defunded it just months after its creation due to concerns it would completely eliminate the right to privacy in the U.S. Called Total Information Awareness, or TIA, the program sought to develop an all-seeing surveillance, that would be the panopticon aspect of it, all-seeing surveillance, all-seeing eye, panopticon, all-seeing surveillance apparatus managed by the Pentagon's DARPA. The official agreement was that invasive surveillance of the entire U.S. population was necessary to prevent terrorist attacks, bioterrorism events, and even naturally occurring disease outbreaks before they could take place. The architect of TIA and the man who led it during its relatively brief existence was John Poindexter, best known for being Reagan's national security advisor during Iran-Contra and being convicted of 5 felonies in relation to that scandal. Poindexter, during the Iran-Contra hearings, had famously claimed that it was his duty to withhold information from Congress. In regard to TIA, one of Poindexter's key allies was, at the time, the chief information officer of the CIA, Alan Wade. Wade met with Poindexter in relation to TIA numerous times and managed the participation of not just the CIA, but all U.S. intelligence agencies that had signed on to add their data as nodes to TIA in exchange gained access to its tools. The TIA program, despite the best efforts of Poindexter and his allies such as Wade, was eventually forced to shut down after considerable criticism and public outrage. For instance, the ACLU claimed that the surveillance effort would kill privacy in America because every aspect of our lives would be cataloged, while several mainstream media outlets warned that TIA was fighting terror by terrifying U.S. citizens. Though the program was defunded, it later emerged that TIA was never actually shut down, with its various programs having been covertly divided among the web of military and intelligence agencies that make up the U.S. national security state. While some of those TIA programs went underground, the core panopticon software that TIA had hoped to wield began to be developed by the very company now known as Palantir, with considerable help from the CIA and Alan Wade, as well as Poindexter. At the time it was formally launched in February 2003, the TIA program was immediately controversial, leading it to change its name in May 2003 to Terrorism Information Awareness in an apparent attempt to sound less like an all-encompassing domestic surveillance system and more like a tool specifically aimed at terrorists. The TIA program was shuttered by the end of 2003. The same month as the TIA name change, and with a growing backlash against the program, Peter Thiel incorporated Palantir. Thiel, however, had begun creating the software behind Palantir months in advance, though he claims he can't recall exactly when. Thiel, Karp, and other Palantir co-founders claimed for years that the company had been founded in 2004, despite the paperwork of Palantir's incorporation by Thiel directly contradicting this claim. Also in 2003, apparently soon after Thiel formally created Palantir, arch neocon Richard Pearl called Poindexter, saying he wanted to introduce the architect of TIA to two Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. According to a report in New York Magazine, Poindexter was precisely the person whom Thiel and Karp wanted to meet, mainly because their new company was similar in ambition to what Poindexter had tried to create at the Pentagon, that is, TIA, Total Information Awareness. During that meeting, Thiel and Karp sought to pick the brain of the man now widely viewed as the godfather of modern surveillance. Soon after Palantir's incorporation, though the exact timing and details of the investment remain hidden from the public, the CIA's In-Q-Tel became the company's first backer aside from Thiel himself, giving it an estimated $2 million. And In-Q-Tel's stake in Palantir would not be publicly reported until mid-2006. The money was certainly useful. In addition, Alex Karp recently told the New York Times that the real value of the In-Q-Tel investment was that it gave Palantir access to the CIA analysts who were its intended clients. A key figure in the making of In-Q-Tel investments during that period, including Palantir, was the CIA's chief information officer at the time, Alan Wade. Excuse me. Alan Wade. After the In-Q-Tel investment, the CIA would be Palantir's only client until 2008. During that period, Palantir's two top engineers, Aki Jain, A-K-I-J-A-I-N, Aki Jain, and Stephen Cohen, traveled to CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia every 2 weeks. Jain recalls making at least 200 trips to CIA headquarters between 2005 and 2009. During those regular visits, CIA analysts would test Palantir's software out and offer feedback, and then Cohen and Jain would fly back to California to tweak it. As with In-Q-Tel's decision to invest in Palantir, the CIA's chief information officer at the time, Alan Wade, played a key role in many of these meetings and subsequently in the tweaking of Palantir's products. It should come as no surprise then that there is an overlap between Palantir's products and the vision that Wade and Poindexter had held for the failed TIA program. One can see the obvious parallels between Palantir and TIA by examining how the masterminds behind each describe their key functions. Take, for instance, the following excerpt from Shane Harris's book, The Watchers, The Rise of America's Surveillance State, regarding Wade's and Poindexter's views of TIA's built-in privacy protections. From the excerpt. Wade liked the idea, but he heard something even more intriguing in Poindexter's pitch. A concept that he hadn't heard in any of the tech briefings he'd sat through since 9/11, the words protect privacy. Wade thought that Poindexter's was the first ambitious information architecture that included privacy from the ground up. He described his privacy appliance concept in which a physical device would sit between the use and the data, shielding the names and other identifying information of the millions of innocent people in the noise. The TIA system would employ selective revelation, Poindexter explained. The farther into the data a user wished to probe, the more outside authority he had to obtain. That's pretty long. That was an over an hour long. Apparently this is part 2. I still don't. I'm gonna look for part 1 because I'm gonna read that one too. This was fascinating. Truly, truly fascinating. All right. All right. Yeah, this was long. All right. Y'all take care.